We get some more interesting updates around CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077, including some more positive updates for the game. I know though, the positive updates are definitely the biggest. There's also been some embarrassing revelations around things, not necessarily a huge deal, but definitely interesting and things I want to talk about and highlight. So the biggest news here is that CD Projekt Red has initiated a settlement agreement against their shareholders who were suing them. If you hadn't followed the situation, basically CDPR before release made it seem like the last gen version of Cyberpunk, that being the version on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, wasn't actually that bad. Of course, as we found out, that was pretty misleading, or at least that's what the shareholders felt, so they sued CDPR. Not too long ago, we heard how CDPR was trying to get this whole thing dismissed, then also how they actually entered into settlement talks, and it seems like those talks were successful because the update coming earlier today is the settlement agreement between the two parties has been agreed on. As they do say, according to the term sheet, members of the class, including the plaintiffs, are relinquish any and all claims against the company and members of its management board. In return, a settlement in the amount of $1,850,000 USD shall be paid out to the class by the company and its insurer. As expressly stated in the term sheet, execution of the term sheet does not imply admission of any responsibility on the part of the company or any of the other defendants named in the case. So CD Projekt Red is not admitting they did anything wrong here. And even further, if you're curious what do they mean or any other defendants, this lawsuit was against CD Projekt Red, the company, but also several of the high-level members of the company who were present during those investor calls. So it's also saying that those individual people, in addition to the company, are not admitting any guilt. And as far as why this decision was made, the company wishes to announce that its decision to enter into the settlement agreement was motivated by the duration and costs related to further legal proceedings in the US, which might arise irrespective of the court's findings, acceptance of the key provisions of the settlement agreement by the company's insurer, opinion expressed by the US law firm representing the company and the other defendants named in the case recommending acceptance of the agreement, the general practice in the US of concluding such litigation by way of an out-of-court settlement. So technically right now, this is not finalized. The court itself has to actually allow this to go through, but it probably will. And overall, this seems like a big win for CD Projekt Red. For just $1.8 million, they are going to get out of this lawsuit and be able to put it behind them. And it seems like they definitely wanted that. Just a couple of weeks after filing for that motion to dismiss, they did get things wrapped up entirely. And on the financial side, CD Projekt Red's stock did go up a fair amount today. Now, obviously, it's not totally clear how much of that are other macro factors versus this one specific factor, but it likely did play at least a somewhat substantial role. And as I've said in past videos, it seems like this was a good move by CDPR to put this behind them so they could start off 2022 almost fresh. They could have that next-gen version release, the soft relaunch of the game, hopefully continue to win back player sentiment. And I say it's a good thing for the company, not necessarily from a moral standpoint. Although speaking of the company, we did recently have the Game Awards. CD Projekt Red did not win any awards, despite Cyberpunk being nominated for 2, although it did win one Game of the Year award, which a lot of fans are latching onto, and that is Cyberpunk 2077's PC version being declared the best game of 2021 by IGN Japan. So obviously that's very specific. It was a top 10 list. Cyberpunk, again, the PC version specifically, was number 1 on that list. I personally think that's pretty questionable, pretty surprising. Cyberpunk's a super solid game, especially on PC. Definitely was not the best game of 2021 in my eyes. For me personally, my game of the year was easily Chivalry 2 for giving me an unparalleled ability to style on other people via a digital means. But let's transition into the more embarrassing side of the recent CD Projekt Red headlines. Recently, we've had a ton of marketing for The Matrix Awakens, the Epic Games experience, but also the movie, and as a result, some interviews with Keanu Reeves, aka Johnny Silverhand. And from this interview with The Verge, we got a couple of interesting quotes, the first of which being,
"Do you play video games?"
No.
No, really?
No.
Even Cyberpunk?
No, I mean, I've seen demonstrations, but I've never played it.
So okay, Keanu is no Henry Cavill, not super into video games, but not really a big deal at the same time. Except if we roll the clock back to November of 2020, we have this quote from the CEO of CD Projekt.
Has Keanu Reeves played the game? Yes, he played the game, but as far as I know, haven't finished yet. So, but definitely he played the game and he loves it.
So you have the CEO of CD Projekt saying that Keanu has not only played Cyberpunk, but that he was loving it while he was playing it, versus Keanu saying he hasn't actually played the game. So now, of course, this story isn't really that big of a deal. Of all of the lies that potentially came from CD Projekt, this is definitely one of the lesser ones, kind of a silly one to come back around though. It's definitely only news because it's more popular to criticize Cyberpunk and CDPR, not to say it isn't justified. As far as what actually happened, perhaps Keanu played small segments of the game at some point. I mean, naturally, he must have seen something or done something, considering he is a main character. And although this is kind of a silly story to pop up, not necessarily the biggest deal in the world, I'm not necessarily mad this is getting called out, because if you look back, this several second long interaction actually spawned a ton of articles. There's a ton of positive press as a result of this, and that actually being corrected and more truthful now does seem somewhat appropriate. Although immediately after that comment, Keanu also gets another question about Cyberpunk, and his answer will almost certainly get this video demonetized.
Did you know that in Cyberpunk they were hacking a character? You were the most requested hack to make a character that you could have sex with be your character.
Yes.
And it got to a point where the game developer said, no, you can't do this because we're not sure if we have permission to do this.
Oh.
But I mean, now that I have you, like, what do you think about that?
Oh my God, it's always nice when it's nice, and you know.
Yeah. It was affection.
I, on the other hand, say no thank you.
So if you're not familiar with this situation, in Cyberpunk 2077, there naturally are Joy Toys, other NPCs that you can romance at will. At a certain point, there was actually a mod that allowed you to body swap other characters onto the Joy Toys, so you could make them look like really whoever you wanted to in Cyberpunk, including Johnny Silverhand. There's an article highlighting this, then there was a bunch of reports. CDPR took the mod down. I reached out to the author of the mod. It seems like what actually happened was CDPR was like, hey, can you not do this? And he chose to take the mod down after all of that coverage. It's not like they issued a DMCA request or anything along those lines. But if you saw this in the headlines or you saw this story about Keanu's reaction versus CPR's reaction, that is the background and what was actually going on there. As far as Cyberpunk 2077 goes right now, the modding scene has actually been getting a ton of super good quality of life mods. I have a video coming on this shortly, hopefully in the next few days. We of course have continued to see a lot of positive sentiment around this game from new and incoming players. This past weekend, Cyberpunk 2077 crossed 30,000 active players on Steam. That's an amount of players we haven't actually seen since February. For November and in the past 2 weeks of December, we've seen some pretty hefty player gains as far as the averages go overall. It's not like it's just peaking out at certain moments. The overall player count is definitely up. You have to imagine CDPR is thrilled with this. It's definitely, again, setting up that nice layup going into 2022. Now the lawsuit's also behind them. They could do some great stuff if what they're planning actually lands. We didn't see any trailers at the Game Awards. I'm not super shocked by that, but we now do have this interesting waiting game. Q1 is only 3 months. Hypothetically, in a month, we could be getting the next gen version. I highly doubt that because we'll probably know about it a bit beforehand, but they also could just kind of drop it as a surprise update. We also do have this backlog of DLCs that are sitting there, so it'll be interesting to see how this all evolves and comes together. As far as CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk going forward, I don't imagine we're going to see much news. A lot of these companies do start to slow down with the holiday season, but I will have a couple of videos looking at, again, a ton of quality of life mods that are getting released right now, the top mods of 2021 overall, because we have some very interesting ones, as well as I might have a few other things looking at some of the quests and the darker side of Cyberpunk, because I feel like that hasn't been explored too crazily. Either way, that's the update around CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk. Obviously, big news, probably still a few weeks to months away, depending on what they do in 2022. With that said, hopefully you guys found this one informative, hopefully you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.